I think the thing that reminds me the most is actually Ghost Ranch, which is, of course, Georgia O'Keeffe's, a very inspired landscape. As we were driving up to that, like right before you get to it, it's just a spectacular cliff side and a little place to pull off the road. And we sat there and did watercolors for an hour or two. But the way that the cliff changed from like an orange to a tan to a blonde, and then the blue skies, it was just spectacular. And of course, when we got to Ghost Ranch as well, you realize, of course, this is why she spent all this time here. It's such an amazing landscape. The story behind this is I had already started working on the project in January in terms of programming, and was trying to develop something that would kind of be procedural, generate images and compositions on the fly rather than me predetermining what anything looks like. And then right after that, in about March, I took a road trip through New Mexico and Arizona, and it worked out really well in terms of the timing because I was happy with some of the ways the movement was working, but I wasn't super crazy about the color palettes and the overall look and feel. So for this particular piece, it's a bit of a departure for me where I'm not completely allowing the computer to determine everything. I took a little bit more of a strong-handed kind of control in terms of the color palettes. So rather than generally generating color like I typically would do with a project, I'm having it pick from some palettes that I took through photographs and sketches that I did in the Southwest. So when you're looking at the piece, you'll see it kind of gradually fade between blues and grays and browns and blacks and kind of a limited palette. And that's a lot more controlled than kind of previous work that I've done. The other inspirations for this piece, especially relating to the show Composed Hypothesis, is I really love Ernst Haeckel and his book, The Art Forms of Nature. And what I really like about his work is that he is kind of accurately describing, as a scientific illustrator, sort of diatoms and jellyfish and different animals and creatures that he was studying. But he also kind of incorporated his own personality and his kind of a belief system in terms of like geometry and arrangement and symmetry into the pieces. And it was a really beautiful arrangement of that combination of what you're looking at, but also the artists themselves kind of taking charge and sort of directing how those imageries is depicted. So for these pieces, I feel like I've done a lot more work in terms of working on the programming so that the forms that are generated have really interesting negative spaces, that the flows kind of have that kind of meditative, kind of Zen-like quality that I was after. So it has like this kind of relaxing quality, but it's also controlled, and there's a lot of work that I did to kind of make sure that the imagery is looking the way that I felt like it would look in terms of a 2D composition. I would kind of liken it to maybe watching a fire burning, where I guess you could say a fire burning is kind of violent, but when you're watching a campfire, it's just kind of endlessly fascinating because it's just kind of moving. It's all kind of the similar speed. So for me, it's that kind of relaxing where it's never the same twice, but it's just kind of interesting, and you can watch little areas or certain things happening, like maybe a little bit of turbulence for a little while, and then it shifts to something that's more monochromatic or more linear and less kind of vortex-like. So to me, I really think that I would say would be as calming as watching a fire or a stream or a waterfall or something like that. While you could always argue those things are kind of violent, I think ultimately they're kind of peaceful to watch. The prints are meant to be sort of like for me at least, a frozen moment of pieces where the way I programmed it, I could actually control sort of how the particles are being emitted when the vortex stream turns on and off. And so these are a little bit more manipulated in terms of I'm a little bit more in control, so they're going to be a little more complex than what you see in the video. And then these are all screenshots, but there's many hundreds of these that I kind of created. And then I edit them down into ones that kind of would look like they would go together as a pair. even though they would occur, minutes or hours apart from each other. Because of the algorithm and because of the way that gradient is sort of driving the color palettes, I could find similarities between multiple pieces. So some of my other pieces were a little bit more direct in terms of if you wave your hand, something on the screen would wave or move immediately. And for this piece, since I wanted it to be more meditative and quiet, I kind of wanted a really subtle interaction. And so the sound and audio is pretty much just a trigger. So if there's not activity or audio within the room or the space, the video gets very quiet and hardly anything is produced or happens. It becomes extremely kind of slow and quiet, but the more activity that's around in terms of audio, it becomes more energetic. And so I kind of felt like the piece was then reflecting the audience or the mood of the room in a way. So it's kind of a very subtle interaction. The other part that I'm doing on this piece is kind of playing around with glitches or flaws on the computer and how it renders to the screen. And a lot of digital artwork kind of really plays in that playground of kind of glitchiness and sort of breaking the computer to make something interesting. I typically don't do that. I tend to try and make things kind of polished or smooth and use the computer to do what it's meant to do. This piece, I'm kind of playing around with the glitchiness a little bit. So I think that combination of a curated palette and a focus on sort of 2D form is an area I'm going to continue in. And I think I'm also going to continue on kind of messing with the way the computer renders to the screen.